The arrow whistled past Josiah McKinnon's ear, close enough to part his graying hair. He rolled behind the boulder as 3 more shafts struck the sandstone where his chest had been a heartbeat before. 47 years old, alone in Apache territory, with a lame horse and a nearly empty canteen, this was how it would end. "Come out, white man," the voice carried across the canyon in perfect English. "We only wish to speak." Josiah spat dust and checked his Colt. 4 rounds left. He'd been running supplies between Fort Verde and the mining camps for 15 years. But the Apache had never been this bold before. The spring of 1887 had brought drought and desperation to both sides of the territorial divide. "Hey, I got nothing." "You want?" he called back, though his voice cracked like old leather. A different voice answered, softer, feminine. "You are McKinnon, the one who buried our husbands with honor." His blood chilled. Last winter, he'd found 4 Apache warriors, frozen in a blizzard, their bodies twisted around a white child they'd died protecting. Against army orders, he'd given them proper burial according to their customs. The child, little Timothy Walsh, had lived because of their sacrifice. "We remember," the woman continued. "Come, we will not harm you." Josiah's weathered hands trembled. He'd lost his own wife, Martha, to consumption 3 years back. Lost his ranch to debt. Lost everything that made life worth living. These women had every right to want his blood. Slowly, he stood with his hands raised. 4 Apache women emerged from the rocks, their faces painted with ash and red clay, the marks of widowhood. The eldest, perhaps 35 with steel gray streaks in her black hair, stepped forward. Her name was Ayanahi, remembered from the burial ceremony, her wailing that had echoed through the canyon like a wounded eagle. "You honored the dead when your own people would have left them for buzzards," she said. "This debt cannot be repaid with words." The youngest widow, Itzel, beautiful despite her grief-worn features, moved closer. "Our children need a father. Our lodge needs a provider." "I ain't Apache," Josiah stammered. "I don't know your ways." The third woman, Nayeli, fierce-eyed and proud, spoke sharply. "You knew our ways enough to honor our dead? You knew enough to risk your life for strangers?" The fourth widow, Chenoa, silent until now, approached and placed her hand on his weathered cheek. "Your heart is already Apache. Your soul chose honor over safety." Josiah felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking, but opening. 3 years he'd wandered these territories like a ghost, finding purpose only in the simple act of moving goods from point to point. Now 4 pairs of dark eyes looked at him with something he'd forgotten existed: hope. "Your people won't accept this," he whispered. Ayana smiled for the first time, transforming her face from stone to sunrise. "Our people follow the old laws. A debt of honor must be repaid. You saved our bloodline by honoring our warriors. Now, we save yours by offering our lodge." The desert wind carried the scent of sage and rain. In the distance, thunder rolled across the mesas, promising the storms that would break the drought. The Apache camp nestled in a hidden valley where cottonwoods grew thick along a seasonal stream. Josiah rode among them on his limping mare, feeling every eye upon him. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, while old men smoked and watched with unreadable faces. Chief Nalnish emerged from the largest wickiup, his silver hair braided with eagle feathers, his face carved by 70 winters. The 4 widows dismounted and spoke rapidly in Apache, their hands moving in quick gestures. Toward Josiah, "Grandmother Spider weaves strange patterns," the chief said in English, his voice like distant thunder. "She brings the white man who honored our fallen to the women who must honor the living." Josiah climbed down from his horse, his joints protesting. "Chief, I don't rightly understand what's happening here." Nolnish studied him with eyes like black flint. "You buried Ayana's husband Kosh, not the great chief, but named for him. You buried Itzal's man Geronimo, called for another great leader. You buried Nail's warrior husband Taza and Chenoa's brave Mangas. 4 pillars of our tribe, gone to the spirit world saving a white child." The chief walked in a slow circle around Josiah, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. "By Apache law, a great debt demands great payment. These women have chosen their payment. I ain't fit to be anybody's husband, Josiah protested. I'm old, broke, got nothing to offer. Ayanna stepped forward. You offered respect to the dead. When the living demanded revenge, that is everything. Over the following days, Josiah learned the rhythm of Apache life. He helped Itzel tend her small garden of corn and beans, his back aching as he learned to work without the plow he'd always relied on. He sat with Nayeli as she taught him to work leather, her strong hands guiding his clumsy fingers in crafting moccasins. Chenoa showed him how to track game through the rocky terrain, reading signs he'd never noticed in 15 years of frontier life. Her knowledge of the land made his own skills seem crude as axe work, but it was Ayanna who challenged him most. The eldest widow expected him to learn Apache customs, to understand the spiritual significance of every ritual. When he stumbled over the pronunciation of sacred words, she corrected him with patience that somehow felt more demanding than anger. Why me? He asked her one evening as they sat by the cook fire. You could have any warrior in the tribe. Ayanna poked at the coals with a long stick, sending sparks spiraling into the desert night. Warriors are young and proud. They fight to prove themselves. You have nothing left to prove, so you can choose wisdom over valor. The other Apache. Men treated him with cautious respect. They'd heard the story of the burial, seen how their chief had accepted him. But Josiah felt the weight of their judgment in every shared meal. Every evening gathering around the central fire, 3 weeks into his stay, a young warrior named Delson challenged him directly. The white man sleeps soft while we prepare for war. The bluecoats gather at Fort Verde. Josiah looked around the circle of faces, firelight dancing in their eyes. What kind of war? Chief Nolnish spoke gravely. The kind that ends with us on a reservation, dying slowly instead of fighting quick. Josiah felt his 4 wives watching him, measuring his response. Everything their acceptance, his place in the tribe, the fragile hope he'd begun to nurture balanced on this moment. The army patrol consisted of 20 soldiers led by Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, a man Josiah knew from his supply runs. They approached under a white flag, but their carbines remained within easy reach, and their faces showed the hard suspicion of men expecting treachery. Josiah stepped forward to meet them at the valley's entrance, his 4 wives flanking him in a show of unity that made Morrison's eyes narrow with calculation. McKinnon, the colonel said, not dismounting. Heard tell you'd gone native. Didn't believe it till now. Colonel Morrison. Josiah touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt strange after weeks of Apache customs. What brings the army? To peaceful territory? Morrison's laugh held no humor. Peaceful? We got reports of war parties gathering, stock missing from the Hernandez ranch, freight wagons attacked on the Verde River Road. None of that came from this camp, Josiah replied steadily.
Your word's supposed to mean something now?
Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. You're consorting with hostiles, McKinnon.
That makes...
You a hostile in my book. Ayanna spoke in rapid Apache to Chief Nolnush, who nodded gravely. The old chief stepped beside Josiah, his presence commanding even in the face of 20 armed soldiers. The white man speaks truth, Nolnush said in English. We raid no ranches, attack no wagons. We hunt only what feeds our children. Morrison's sergeant, a grizzled man named Patterson, whispered something in his colonel's ear. Morrison's expression darkened further. Chief, you're harboring deserters from civilization. This man has obligations to the territorial government. Contracts to fulfill. The contracts expired when my horse went lame, Josiah said. I'm a free man making free choices, free to turn renegade. Morrison's hand drifted toward his service pistol. Free to teach Apache how to fight cavalry tactics. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Josiah felt his wives tense behind him. Felt the entire camp watching this confrontation that could determine their fate. I've taught no one anything about fighting, Josiah said carefully. I've learned to tend crops, work leather, track game, peaceful pursuits. Itzel stepped forward, her young face set with determination. In halting English, she said, This man, he teach children. White man words, teach trading, peace words. It was true. Josiah had been teaching English to the Apache children, helping them understand the changing world they'd inherit. But he'd also learned their hunting techniques, their knowledge of terrain and weather, pattern skills that could indeed prove valuable in warfare. Morrison studied the camp with a tactician's eye, noting the defensive positions, the escape routes, the careful placement of warriors among the women and children. "You've got 3 days, McKinnon," he finally said. 3 days to come to your senses and return to civilization. After that, you're an enemy combatant." As the patrol rode away, Chief Nolnish placed a weathered hand on Josiah's shoulder. "The Bluecoats. We'll return with more men," the chief said quietly. "This valley will not shelter us much longer." That night, the tribal council met in the sacred lodge. Josiah sat with his 4 wives, feeling the weight of responsibility he'd never asked for, but couldn't abandon. The debates raged in rapid Apache, but he caught enough words to understand the terrible choice facing the tribe. Surrender meant reservation life, slow death by confinement and government rations. Fighting meant quick death, but death is free. People on their ancestral lands? "There's another way," Josiah said during a pause in the discussion. All eyes turned to him. Even speaking in council was a privilege he'd barely earned. "The mining camps need workers, good workers who know the land, who can find water and safe passages through the mountains. Honest work for honest wages." Young Delson spat into the fire. "Work for the men who steal our gold from our sacred mountains." "Work that keeps your people alive," Josiah replied. "Work that teaches your children skills they'll need in the white man's world without forgetting who they are." The negotiations took place on neutral ground beside Fossil Creek, where the ancient waters bubbled up from limestone caverns to create a green oasis in the desert landscape. Josiah had arranged the meeting through his old contact's mine foreman, who knew him as reliable and honest. Apache leaders who'd begun to trust his counsel. James Cunningham, owner of the richest copper mine in the territory, arrived with 2 bodyguards and a lawyer. Chief Nolnish brought his war leader and medicine man. Josiah sat between the 2 groups, feeling the weight of both worlds pressing down on his shoulders. "Your Indians willing to work underground?" Cunningham asked. Bluntly, he was a practical man who'd made his fortune by cutting through diplomatic niceties to reach profitable agreements. "My people work where the spirits permit," Nolnish replied carefully. "The deep earth holds sacred places." Josiah translated the cultural nuances both men were missing. "The Apache will work the surface operations, hauling or maintaining equipment, guarding supply lines. They know every trail and water source in these mountains." "What about raids?" Cunningham's lawyer interjected. "How do we guarantee these same Indians won't attack our shipments?" The question hung in the desert air like gun smoke. Josiah felt his 4 wives watching from the cottonwood shade where the Apache women waited. Their future and that of their children depended on his answer. "You'll have my word," Josiah said simply. "I stake my life on their honor." Cunningham studied him with shrewd eyes. "Your life don't mean much if you're already half Apache, McKinnon. What stakes do you bring to this table?" Josiah pulled out a leather pouch and emptied it on the blanket between them. Gold nuggets and silver coins caught the sunlight as life savings. Everything he'd managed to preserve after losing the ranch. $2,000, he said. "Security against any losses from Apache raids. You keep it for a full year. There's trouble. You keep it permanent." The mine owner's expression shifted from skepticism to genuine interest. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" "A chance to build something instead of just surviving," Josiah replied. Over the next 3 hours, they hammered out the details. The Apache would provide 50 workers for surface operations at standard territorial wages. They'd maintain exclusive rights to hunt and gather in specified areas. Their children could attend the mining camp school alongside white children. Most importantly, they could remain on their ancestral lands rather than face removal to the San Carlos Reservation. As the sun reached its zenith, Cunningham extended his hand to Chief Nolnish. "We got ourselves a deal, Chief." The ride back to the hidden valley felt different to Josiah. His 4 wives rode beside him, their faces showing the first real hope he'd seen since their initial meeting. Children ran out to greet the returning party, their laughter echoing off canyon walls like birdsong. But that evening, as the tribe celebrated around the central fire, Delson approached with troubling news. Riders came while you were gone, the young warrior reported. White men asking questions about the Apache camp. They offered gold for information about your location. Ayanna leaned close to Josiah. Not soldiers, she said quietly. Different. Kind of white men, dangerous kind. Josiah's blood chilled as understanding dawned. Bounty hunters. The territorial government had placed a price on certain Apache leaders' heads, and his association with the tribe had made him a target as well. The mining contract wouldn't protect them if professional manhunters were already on their trail. Many? He asked Delson. 6 men, well armed. They made camp at Willow Springs, 2 days' ride from here. Chief Nolish joined their whispered conference. These men will not honor flags of truce or respect sacred ground. They are killers for money. Josiah looked around at the families gathering for the evening meal, children playing games in the firelight, elders sharing stories, young couples courting in the shadows. All of this would be destroyed if the bounty hunters found the valley. We could run, Chenoa suggested. Take the high trails, disappear into the Superstition Mountains. Running makes us look guilty, Josiah replied. And those mountains won't hide us forever. Naeli's eyes glinted with fierce determination. Then we fight. 6 against 60. Josiah shook his head. They'll just bring more men, turn it into a war that brings the whole army down on us. As he spoke, a plan began forming in his mind. Dangerous, perhaps foolish. But their only chance to secure the future they'd negotiated? Josiah rode into the bounty hunters' camp alone. His hands visible and empty, his weathered face set in the expression of a man who'd made peace with death. The 6 men around the campfire looked like exactly what they were, professional killers dressed as drifters. Their weapons clean and ready despite their casual postures. Their leader, a pale man with a neat beard and dead eyes, stood slowly. Well, Josiah McKinnon. You just saved us considerable trouble. Figured I might, Josiah replied, dismounting carefully. Name's Carter, ain't it? Heard tell you're looking for me. Ezra Carter smiled without warmth. Bounties, 500. For you, dead or alive? 2004 Chief Nolish and any war leaders we bring in. Seems you've been keeping interesting company. The other hunters spread out in a loose circle, their hands near their weapons. Josiah recognized the tight men who'd turned manhunting into a business after the war, who saw Apache scalps as just another commodity to harvest. The chief's dead, Josiah lied smoothly. Died of fever 3 weeks back. That's why I left the camp. Carter's eyes narrowed. You're saying there's no Apache leaders left in that valley? I'm saying there's no valley. The tribe scattered after. Nolish passed. Some headed for Mexico, others for the reservations. Nothing left but old campsites and memories. One of the hunters, a scarred man named Pike, spat tobacco juice into the fire. He's lying, Ezra. Intel says the whole band's still together? Intel from who? Josiah asked. Army's been chasing shadows for months. Half the reports they get come from ranchers seeing their own horses in the moonlight. Carter studied him with the patience of a predator. Maybe you're trying to protect your Apache wives. Heard you took up with some squaws after your white woman died. The insult hit its mark, but Josiah kept his expression neutral. Getting angry would only confirm Carter's suspicions. Man gets lonely, he said with a shrug. Apache women know how to take care of a fellow, and they don't ask. Too many questions about his past. Where are they now? Another hunter asked. Gone with the rest. Probably halfway to Sonora by now. Josiah sat down on a convenient rock, projecting the weariness of a man defeated by circumstances. Left me high and dry when they heard bounty. Hunters were asking questions. Carter walked around him in a slow circle, like a wolf testing for weakness. You know, McKinnon, I almost believe you. Almost. But $500 is $500. You're not got expenses to cover. Figured. You might say that. Josiah reached slowly into his vest pocket, ignoring the way gun hammers clicked back around the circle. He pulled out a folded paper and tossed it at Carter's feet. Mining contract, signed and witnessed. I'm gainfully employed as of yesterday. Carter picked up the document and read it by firelight, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to frustrated calculation. Cunningham Copper Company, he muttered. Legitimate territory business. Protected by territorial law, Josiah added. You gun down one of Cunningham's employees, you'll have the full weight of the territorial government. Down on your heads. Mining interests carry more weight than bounty warrants these days. The hunters exchanged uncertain glances. Killing a drifter who'd gone native was one thing. Murdering a contracted employee of a major territorial enterprise was quite another. Contract. Don't protect you if you're harboring wanted criminals, Pike pointed out. Which I ain't, Josiah replied. Check the camps yourself if you don't believe me. I'll even guide you there for the usual fee. Carter's laugh sounded like breaking glass. Got brass, I'll give you that. But I think we'll scout those canyons. Ourselves, just to be sure. Suit yourself. Just remember, you find nothing, you owe me an apology. You find something and can prove I lied. You collect your bounty fair and square. As Josiah rode away from their camp, he could feel Carter's suspicious stare burning between his shoulder blades. The plan was simple in concept, but deadly in execution. By tomorrow night, either the bounty hunters would be convinced the Apache had vanished, or everyone he'd come to love would be dead. The hardest part would be convincing his wives to trust him one more time. The Apache camp dissolved like morning mist before the coming storm. In a single night, 60 people vanished so completely that even their tracks seemed to fade into the desert floor. Josiah watched from a hidden ridge as Carter's hunters rode into the empty valley, their faces showing the frustrated confusion of men who'd been outmaneuvered. Ayanna crouched beside him among the pine trees, weathered hands steady on her rifle. They will search for 3 days, she whispered. Maybe 4. Long enough, Josiah replied, though his chest felt tight with worry. The plan depended on perfect timing and Apache skills he was only beginning to understand. Below them, the hunters spread out to examine the abandoned camp. They found old fire rings, worn paths, scattered debris that suggested recent habitation, but nothing to indicate where the inhabitants had gone or when they might return. Chief Nolnish had divided the tribe into 4 groups, each taking a different route through terrain so rough that even Apache ponies struggled with the crossing. They would reunite at the ancient stronghold in the Superstition Mountains, a place sacred to the Apache and unknown to white maps. But first, they had to ensure Carter's men left the territory convinced they'd been chasing ghosts. It's all materialized. From shadow beside a boulder, her young face painted with ash and clay in the pattern of invisibility. She moved with fluid grace across ground that would challenge a mountain goat, carrying a message from Nayeli's group. The hunters searched the northern canyons, she reported in whispered Apache. 3 men, moving slowly. Chenoa's voice drifted down from higher on the ridge. 2 more at the water holes. Expect us to return for water. And Carter. Josiah asked, still in the valley, growing angry. Ayanna replied with grim satisfaction. He knows he has been fooled but cannot prove it. The 4th day brought crisis. One of Carter's men found Sinachild's moccasin print in soft earth near a hidden spring. The discovery sent the bounty hunters racing along a trail that led directly toward the Superstition stronghold. Josiah made the decision that would haunt his dreams for years to come. I have to stop them, he told his wives as they gathered in hurried counsel among the rocks. Nayeli's eyes flashed with fierce protectiveness. Not alone. This is Apache business now. No, Josiah said firmly. This is white man's business. Carter and his kind understand only one language. He'd hoped to avoid bloodshed to solve the crisis through cunning and negotiation, but some problems could only be resolved through the harsh justice of the frontier. And Josiah had learned that lesson in harder schools than most men survived. That evening, he walked into Carter's camp for the 2nd time, but now he came armed and ready for what must happen next. Back for more conversation, McKinnon? Carter asked, though his hand rested on his pistol grip. Back to settle accounts, Josiah replied quietly. You found the trail? Carter's smile turned predatory. Figured we would, eventually. Apache can't hide from men who know their business. But you won't be following it any further. The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Around the camp, the other hunters shifted position, reading the threat in Josiah's voice and posture. That a challenge? Pike asked, his hand moving toward his weapon. It's a fact, Josiah, said, his own gun clearing leather with the fluid motion of long practice. The gunfight lasted perhaps 10 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 4 men lay still around the campfire, while 2 others fled into the darkness, their courage broken by the sudden violence. Carter, dying with a hole in his chest, looked up at Josiah with something almost like respect. Top, figure you for a killer. Neither did I, Josiah replied, holstering his smoking Colt. But some things matter more than what we figure ourselves for. As dawn broke over the desert, Josiah McKinnon sat beside the cooling ashes of the bounty hunter's fire, surrounded by the dead and wondering if he'd saved his new family or destroyed his soul in the process. The Apache stronghold nestled in a hidden basin high in the Superstition Mountains, surrounded by walls of red stone that had weathered 10,000 winters. Ancient petroglyphs covered the cliff faces, spirals, handprints, and hunting scenes that spoke of generations who'd found refuge in this sacred place. Josiah arrived 3 days after the gunfight, his horse exhausted from the treacherous climb up hidden trails that seemed to vanish behind him. The tribe had been waiting, but their faces showed none of the celebration he'd expected. Chief Nolnish approached as Josiah dismounted, the old man's expression grave as winter clouds. The spirits are troubled, the chief said without preamble. Blood calls to blood across the desert. Word had already reached the stronghold, not just of the gunfight, but of its consequences. The territorial governor had issued new warrants. The army was mobilizing. What Josiah had intended as a surgical solution to their problem had metastasized into the very war he'd tried to prevent. I did what had to be done, Josiah said, though the words felt like ashes in his mouth. You did what a white man would, Duayana replied, her voice carrying disappointment that cut deeper than anger. But you are Apache now. You should have found the Apache way. Around the central fire that night, the tribe held council to decide their fate. The younger warriors, led by Delson, argued for immediate flight to Mexico. The elders counseled patience and negotiation. The women spoke of their children's futures in a world where Apache ways were becoming memories. Josiah sat with his 4 wives, feeling the weight of their reproach. In trying to protect them, he'd endangered everyone they loved. There's still the mining contract, he said during a lull in the debate. Cunningham won't let the army interfere with his business interests. Chief Nolnish shook his head slowly. The contract dies with trust. Who will hire Apache workers now? Who will believe we seek peace when our white husband kills white men? It's all. Spoke for the first time that evening, her young voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. The old world is ending. The new world has not yet begun. We are caught between like birds in a storm, as if summoned by her words. A rider approached the stronghold, one of the Apache scouts who'd remained in the lowlands to watch for pursuit. His news sent cold fear through every heart around the fire. 3 companies of cavalry, he reported breathlessly. Colonel Morrison leads them. They ride for the sacred mountains with Apache guides from San Carlos. Reservation Apache, broken by confinement and promises, leading white soldiers to the last free stronghold. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet wound. How long? Chief Nolnish asked. 2 days if they find the main trail, longer if they must search. The council erupted into fierce debate. Some wanted to fight from the stronghold's natural defenses. Others demanded immediate evacuation. The arguments raged in rapid Apache, punctuated by desperate gestures toward the sleeping children and elders, who couldn't survive another forced march. Josiah stood slowly, his decision crystallizing like ice in winter air. There's another way, he said, his voice cutting through the debate. 1 man rides down to meet Morrison. 1 man takes responsibility for what happened. No. The word came from all 4 of his wives simultaneously, their voices harmonizing. In absolute rejection, it's the only way, Josiah continued. Morrison wants someone to blame for this mess. Give him what he wants, and he might let the tribe go in peace. Chenoa stepped forward, her fierce eyes blazing with maternal protectiveness. You are husband to us, father to our children. You cannot abandon that responsibility. I'm not abandoning it, Josiah replied quietly. I'm fulfilling it. Chief Nolnish studied him with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of worlds. The Apache way is not to sacrifice one for many. The Apache way is to find honor in any fate the spirits send. Then let the spirits decide, Josiah said. I'll ride down at first light. If Morrison accepts my surrender, the tribe goes free. If not, ... he shrugged. Fight from the best ground we'll ever have. That night, his 4 wives took turns sitting beside his blanket, speaking in whispered Apache of love and loss, of duty and sacrifice. They told him stories of their first husbands, brave men who died protecting what they cherished. They spoke of the children who would grow up remembering a white man who'd chosen to become Apache in his heart. As dawn painted the eastern peaks with fire, Josiah McKinnon prepared to ride down from the stronghold, not knowing if he rode toward redemption or destruction. Colonel Morrison's camp sprawled across the desert floor like a military anthill. 3 companies of cavalry arranged in perfect formation despite the rough terrain. Cook fires sent thin streams of smoke into the morning air, while troopers cleaned weapons and tended horses with the efficiency of professional soldiers. Josiah rode down from the mountain trail with a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel, his weathered face set in resignation. Behind him, hidden among the red rocks of the stronghold, 60 Apache watched their adopted kinsman descend toward what might be his final negotiation. Morrison emerged from his command tent as Josiah approached the perimeter. The colonel looked older than their last meeting, his face showing the strain of a campaign that had cost more in political capital than enemy casualties. McKinnon, Morrison said without warmth. Come to surrender. Come to talk, Josiah replied, dismounting slowly. Man to man, soldier to soldier. You're no soldier. You're a turncoat who's caused me more trouble than a regiment of Apache. Josiah studied the camp, noting the weary faces of troopers who'd spent weeks chasing shadows through hostile terrain. These weren't the eager recruits he'd seen at Fort Verde. These were tired men who wanted to go home to wives and farms and civilian lives. Your boys look worn down, Colonel. How many you lost to this campaign? Morrison's jaw tightened. Dead, 6 wounded, half the horses lame from mountain trails. All because you decided to play Apache instead of doing your duty as a white man. My duty was to honor the dead and protect the living, Josiah said quietly. Same as yours, when you get down to it. A crowd of officers and senior sergeants had gathered around them, drawn by the novelty of seeing the man who'd caused their recent hardships. Josiah recognized several faces from his supply-running daysmen who'd shared whiskey and stories around garrison fires. You killed 4 bounty hunters, Morrison continued, his voice rising with suppressed anger. Legitimate lawmen carrying territorial warrants. I killed 4 murderers who were hunting women and children for money, Josiah corrected. Others. A difference, even if the law don't recognize it. Captain Hayes, Morrison's second in command, stepped forward. The territorial governor wants your head, McKinnon. Figuratively speaking, you're wanted for murder, consorting with hostiles, and violation of the territorial peace. Josiah nodded slowly. Figured as much. What's it worth to you? Morrison's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What do you mean? I mean, I'm willing to surrender myself, stand trial, take whatever punishment you think I deserve. But I got conditions. You're in no position to make conditions? Maybe, maybe not. Josiah gestured toward the surrounding mountains. Those peaks are full of Apache who know every trail, every cave, every water source. They can disappear like smoke if they want to, or they can fight from positions that'll cost you half your command before you dig them out. The assembled officers shifted uncomfortably. They'd all heard stories of Apache strongholds that had held off entire armies, of cavalry companies that had ridden into mountain canyons and never ridden out. What do you want? Morrison asked grudgingly. Safe passage. For the tribe, no pursuit, no attempts to force them onto reservations. They got a mining contract with Cunningham. Let them honor it and live in peace. The Apache who were harboring you are wanted criminals. Families trying to survive in a world that's changing too fast, Josiah corrected. Chief Nolnish never raised a hand against white settlers, never raided ranches or attacked wagon trains. The only crime these people committed was giving shelter to a man who honored their dead. Lieutenant Patterson, Morrison's intelligence officer, whispered something in the colonel's ear. Morrison's expression shifted from anger to calculating interest. The territorial government wants this Apache problem settled permanently, Morrison said slowly. Total victory or total peace? No middle ground. Then give them total peace. Let the tribe work the mining contract, send their children to school, become part of the territory instead of enemies of it. Morrison walked to a camp chair and sat down heavily, the weight of command visible in every line of his body. And you, I stand trial for whatever charges you want to bring, accept whatever sentence the court hands down. The silence stretched. Between them like a taut rope around the camp, troopers had stopped their morning routines to watch the negotiation that might determine whether they'd spend the next month fighting in mountain strongholds or marching home to their families. Finally, Morrison looked up at his assembled officers. Gentlemen, what's your assessment? The responses came in military cadence. Tactical situation unfavorable. Supply lines overextended. Casualties mounting. Political pressure increasing. Every factor pointed toward the wisdom of accepting Josiah's offer. Done, Morrison said at last, but McKinnon, if there's even one raid, one missing cow, one broken promise from your Apache friends, I'll hunt down every last member of that tribe. Josiah extended his wrists for the shackles, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he'd saved his chosen family but might never see them again. The territorial courthouse in Prescott buzzed with curiosity as citizens packed the gallery to witness the trial of the white man who'd gone Apache. Newspaper reporters scrib,